Yeah, so let's start and welcome again to this webinar about postdoc in Sweden or abroad. And my name is Robert Andersson. I'm head of negotiations team at SULF, but I also work a lot with other issues. And just shortly about SULF, we are a professional association for teachers, researchers, and doctoral candidates. We have more than 22,000 members. We have no connection to political parties, and we are one of the unions within the Swedish Confederation of Professional Associations, SACO. And as a member in SULF, you can get advice and support on matters related to your employment or activity at university in case you are not employed. We have an income insurance policy included in the membership. I will come back to that. And also membership health insurance is included. And you can access a range of material at our webpage. And we offer insurances and other benefits with reduced fees. And I will talk about insurances later on. So today we will talk about the rules for postdoc employment in Sweden and also when you are posted abroad by a university in Sweden. We will talk about social insurance after a postdoc in Sweden or abroad and also under that time. Additional insurances that you might need when you are in Sweden or abroad as a postdoc. National registration in Sweden and unemployment insurance. And then I will talk in the end about residence permits and how to be able to stay in Sweden after a postdoc or when you return from abroad. So we'll start with the postdoc agreement. And the postdoc agreement is a collective agreement when you work and have an employment in Sweden or are employed in Sweden and posted abroad, which is quite usual now when you get grants from, for example, Vetenskapsrådet. The postdoc agreement regulates some conditions for postdoc, although most conditions are regulated by the general collective agreements that covers all employees. But this agreement opens for a fixed term contract for a minimum of 2 years and maximum 3 years. And that is in addition to other regulations about fixed term contracts. So you can have some even more time as fixed term contract if you use other regulations. This agreement is supposed to cover employments as postdoc at not more than 3 years after your doctoral degree. But there are exceptions if you, after the degree, has been on parental leave and sickness, for example. It includes minimum of 80% research. It should be a full-time employment, and you are supposed to get extension for parental leave and sickness. So the employment may, in that case, be for more than 3 years. We have also included an automatic leave of absence if you have this employment in Sweden and are posted abroad with a URA contract, and I will come back to that in the next slide. This agreement was updated in February 2022. We had one from 2008, but for various reasons we made a new agreement with Arbetsgivarverket, and this agreement is valid at the universities in Sweden and other organizations within the state sector, and that covers most of the universities. And you can find the agreement at Arbetsgivarverket's web, and it's also translated into English there. URA contract is a contract you sign with the employer in Sweden when you are posted abroad. And as you know, if you get a grant from Vetenskapsrådet, for example, you are supposed to be abroad for some time and in Sweden for some time. And while you are posted abroad, you sign this individual contract, and that regulates the conditions during that time. Some conditions are optional, some are not, and the optional conditions opens for a possibility to get compensation for additional costs, travels, childcare, and so on that you need when you are abroad. And some of that can be also tax-free. And it's important, as we will see later on as well, that when you work abroad for an employer within the state, the time is considered as work in Sweden when it comes to social security and unemployment insurance. And then there is a question how to count it when it comes to migration issues. That's something that must be resolved. So now it could be worth to mention a few words about the difference between stipends and employments. And a scholarship or a stipend, it's a tax-free payment that you can have under certain conditions. And for example, for research. But what is important with a stipend is that you have no obligation to work, actually, because if someone would demand that you work, then it cannot no longer be tax-free. And we know there are some questions. How can you work, for example, with teaching when you have a scholarship? And that could be problematic due to these tax rules. Sometimes you may have a part-time employment in parallel with the stipend, but that may jeopardize the fact that it's tax-free. And if that happens, you may have to pay taxes, and the employer may also have to pay taxes, or the university. So that's something that you have to figure out. Normally, a stipend can be tax-free for up to 2 years. And as I said, no duties, but that also means that you don't have that many rights as well, as we will see. For example, no pension. There are many restrictions when it comes to benefits within the social security and unemployment insurances, and you are not covered by conditions in collective agreements. So next section about social security. And this is, of course, in Sweden handled by Försäkringskassan. So first we can look at who can get benefits from Försäkringskassan in Sweden. And here we have two types of benefits. Some benefits based on residency. That could be, for example, barnbidrag or child allowance. And here we would say that postdocs, you are included here no matter what type of financing you have, also with the stipend, that is. We have seen some problems sometimes with this, and therefore it's important that you do not call yourself a student when you have any contacts with Försäkringskassan. In our opinion, you cannot be a student after having the highest degree possible, which is the doctoral degree. But we know that the term postdoc student is also used. And if you are today employed as a doctoral candidate, that it can be good to know that you should not be considered as a student. And I say that because if you come to Sweden for studies and you come from a country outside EU, you are not allowed to get residency-based benefits. But that does not affect doctoral candidates with employment. And then we have the employment-based benefits. And as you hear from the name, they are based on employment and an income from that, and a taxable income. And you should have this income now, or at least have had such an income before, in order to get employment-based benefits. And employment-based benefits could be for parental leave and sickness, for example. And they are based on the income you have or are expected to have in the future. In some cases, the employment may have been in another member state in EU or the EEA states. I will come to some examples later. In between residence permits, that's something for those of you that need a residence permit and you might have applied and you are waiting for a new one, then in many cases or most cases, you should still access these benefits. So that should not be a problem in most cases. So here, just an example, if we have Umar from Pakistan, who is here on a scholarship for a stipend for 2 years. And he's not from EU. And then if he intends to stay in Sweden for more than a year and have a residence permit, then he should get the residency-based benefits. But as a non-employee, he's not entitled to employment-based benefits, unless if he had been working here or in other EU countries before. If Omar instead would have been employed in Sweden, he could access all benefits from Försäkringskassan, both for residency and for work. And here we have Indira from Italy, and she's here within employment for 2 years. And EU EA citizens that work in Sweden, they are covered by Swedish social security system without any restrictions. And if you have worked before in another member state, that work should also be considered. For example, if you need that in order to fulfill any qualification time that we have, for example, for parental leave. And here I can mention that Switzerland in many cases are also under the same regulation as these states. And these states are the EU members plus Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein. But the rules for Switzerland is in some cases a bit different. If Indira had been from a country outside EU EA, but had worked here before within this area, what would happen then? Then in most cases, you are considered under the same rules as EU EA citizens. That is when you go from one legal stay in one country to another. And of course, the opposite, if you work in Sweden now and you start to work in another state within EU EA, you can count the work in Sweden in order to qualify for benefits there if needed. But it's, of course, then different if you go to countries outside EU, as we will see. So if you are posted abroad by a state employer, as we mentioned before, you are insured in Sweden all the time, just as if you stayed here. And that's all over the world. If you work in another country in the EU EA for an employer there, you are usually insured in that country and not any longer in Sweden. But if you work for a Swedish employer that is not a state employer, you may be insured in that country where you work and not in Sweden, although the employer is situated here. Then there are exceptions. If you are posted in this other country, there might be an exception. So that's something you have to sort out with your employer and Försäkringskassan. And I also want to mention that we have 2 universities that is under the same collective agreements that the state universities. Somewhat different because they are not state institutions, and Chalmers and Jönköping University. But within EU, they are considered as public employers. So then you are also insured in Sweden, but that does not happen. If you go outside EU, then you might only be included in Swedish social security for at most 1 year. If you have a stipend instead, you could still get some benefits from Sweden, but it depends again if you travel within or outside EU EA. If you go outside EU EA and intend to stay there for more than 6 months, you can no longer access benefits based on residency, for example. So you should report your stay abroad to the authorities. Because if you receive benefits that you're not entitled to, you might have to, or you will have to pay them back, and it can also be some serious consequences. So again, contact Försäkringskassan to find out about your specific situation. So what happens when you return to Sweden or after having a stipend here as a postdoc? If you were posted abroad by a state employer, there's no problem. You can return here and resume all the benefits here based on that work. If you worked for another other employer within EUEA, then you will normally be insured in Sweden again when you return, and the work abroad will be considered to acquire benefits here based on employment as well. But if you had a stipend, it depends on how long, for how long time. And it doesn't matter if it's in Sweden or abroad, but normally you can only access benefits based on previous work for up to 1 year and not more. And again, you should contact Försäkringskassan to find out more. Remember also that if you return to Sweden and you are from a country outside EU, you will also have to make sure that you have a residence and work permit when you return in order to get benefits here. So now we'll come to insurances. And first I would like to mention that if you have an employment, you are covered by many insurances regulated in collective agreements. And this can be good to know. And that, for example, is if you there is a work-related injury or work-related sickness. There is one agreement that covers that. We also have life insurance in another agreement. We have survivor's pension in the pension agreement. We have sickness pension. That's if you are on a long-term sickness and you get that approved by Försäkringskassan. And also for shorter sickness, we have other compensation from the employer through the agreement for general working conditions, villkorsavtal T, and the same for parental leave. We have, as you will see later on, agreement on compensation when you are unemployed, where you can also get support in order to find a new job. If you are on work-related travels or posted abroad, you are covered by insurance from Kammarkollegiet. And then when it comes to work remotely from abroad, we have some issues to sort out how our collective agreements covers that, and we hope to resolve that rather soon. So if you go abroad, if you are posted abroad by state employer, you will have an insurance through Kammarkollegiet. And this insurance, you can read about it at the web of Kammarkollegiet if you look for insurance for personnel stationed abroad. And it's also possibility for the university to sign for an additional insurance to cover also your belongings when you go abroad. But if not, or in general, it can still be a good idea to check with your insurance company if you need additional insurances when you live abroad. If you work for an employer abroad, you should talk to that employer what kind of insurances they have, or as an employer or in that country. You can talk to the union abroad, and you can talk to insurance company in Sweden, of course. And I can mention here that we have agreements for a free guest membership with other similar unions in these countries mentioned here. And then you can have a free membership with them for up to 2 years if you stay as a member in SULF. And that could be good. Then you can get advice from them about that particular country. So then we have other optional insurances. The unemployment insurance, I will come back to that. It's highly recommended, but it's not automatic. You can have an additional income insurance. I will mention that as well. And we have cooperation with insurance company Trygg-Hansa, where you can sign home insurance, insurance for your car or other belongings with a reduced rate. And then we have cooperation with Folksam, another insurance company, and with them we offer accident insurance for accidents, for time off work, child insurance, health insurance, and life insurance, for example. I also said before that we have insurances included in the membership, and that's the income insurance. That also requires membership in A-kassan. That's important to know. I will come back to that. We also have included a health insurance in the membership. If you have been able to work for the last 90 days, then you're covered by that. And that includes preventive healthcare, incapacity for work, and other benefits as well. And this, if you are sick yourself, it covers 2 months after the first 3 months you are on sickness. If you want to add additional protection, you can add insurances, and Folksam can provide advice on what you might need in that case. Yeah, and if you look at our webpage with Folksam, you will find our member insurance. As a new member, you will get some of them for free for 3 months, and that's those you can see here. And then after that, you can decide if you want to keep them or keep some of them or expand them. And again, you can get advice from Folksam about your particular situation. Then a short section about national registration in folkbokföring. And if we start with those from outside EU, you have the right to register in Sweden if you intend to live here for at least 1 year. And you need a residence permit, not necessarily for 1 year or more, if you can show that your intention is to stay for at least a year. And if you're EU citizen, it's basically the same, but you should intend to live here for at least a year, and you should have right of residence. And I will come back to that in the end, but you almost always have right of residence without any problem when you come here. And the other way around, if you intend to leave Sweden for at least 1 year, you should not anymore be registered in Sweden. However, if you're posted abroad by a state employer, you are registered in Sweden as long as you are posted abroad. So there is no time limit, and that's all over the world. So that's another advantage with this type of employments. So, and it's Skatteverket that handles this, so you can turn to them if you have questions. So now we will come to unemployment insurance, the unemployment fund, or A-kassa as it's always often called. And this is, again, as I said, an optional insurance, so it's not mandatory or automatic if you're a member in a union, for example. It has its own rules and regulations that differ from social security system. And this means also that you have to make your own application for membership in this insurance. And we recommend that you join Akademikernas A-kassa, which is the best A-kassa, I would say. And the fee for that membership is 130 crowns per month. You will get 25% of that back as tax reduction the year after, if you have a taxable income to reduce tax from. You can be a member here as soon as you have worked at any time in Sweden or in EU. And this is an individual insurance, so you are not insured through any family member when it comes to unemployment. And to get unemployment benefit, if you're unemployed, you should fulfill some requirements. One is that you need a work permit, right to work here, which is, again, for those of you outside EU. And you usually have that also if you have applied for a new residence permit in time, and that is before the permit you have runs out. And you should also fulfill the membership requirement. That is that you should be a member in the unemployment insurance fund for at least 1 year before unemployment starts. And then the work requirement is that you should work a certain number of hours for at least 6 months during the last year. Then there are some exceptions there from if you have been on parental leave and so on. But you should work and you should be a member. The compensation level is about 80% of the average salary you have had the last year. But there is a ceiling, so you can only get at most 80% of 33,000 crowns per month. And that is for 100 days. And after that, the ceiling is reduced to 27,500. And you can get unemployment benefits for 300 days, and that's 300 weekdays, so that's about 60 weeks in total, or 14 months. And if you, at the time when you have used 300 days, have children under 18, you will get additional 150 days, in 450 days in total in that case. And when it comes to postdoc stipends, a stipend as such will not give right to unemployment benefits. But in this case, such time can be considered as studies, no matter what we think about that. But and that's so-called omissible time. So then A-kassan will look at any work or any employment you had before that, and you can get compensation based on that if this is approved. And it's important to still pay the membership fee to A-kassan. So, for example, if you had an employment in Sweden and then you went on a full-time stipend as a postdoc, that can be omissible time for up to 5 years, and then you can get compensation based on the previous employment, but not based on the stipend as such. Then there are 2 ways to get 80% of your full income. That is to get compensation for salaries over the ceiling in the unemployment insurance. And one is the transition agreement, and the other one is our income insurance. The transition agreement is a collective agreement, and we have an association called Trygghetsstiftelsen, the Job Security Foundation, associated with this. And their job is basically to help you to find a new job or to start an own company as soon as possible. You can qualify for this either if you are made redundant, that's usually when you have a permanent employment, but also if you have a fixed term contract that expires. What can the Job Security Foundation do? We used to have 3 different qualifications for those with fixed term contracts, or 3 groups. Now from October 2022, we basically only have 2, and one is if you have been employed for 2 years or more, then you can get quite extensive support from them to find a new job, but you can also get additional compensation if you receive unemployment benefits, and that is for up to 44 days or 2 months in that case. Then if you have been employed for 6 years or more, you can get even more support, but then you are not allowed to count time as doctor candidate to qualify for this part after 6 years. So as a doctor candidate, you can only qualify for the first package that you get after at least 2 years of employment. So then we have our income insurance in the membership. It's included in the membership fee. You need to be a member in SULF for 1 year and also in A-kassan for 1 year at least. The benefit is that you can get up to 80% of your previous income. The first 2 days you are not compensated during unemployment, and then you will also not get compensation from the income insurance. The income insurance covers 150 working days, so half the time you can get unemployment benefits in most cases. We also have included some support coaching to find new job. And that is, of course, most important if you're not covered by Trygghetsstiftelsen. And you can add an insurance and individually and to cover another 150 days, so 300 days in total. And for that, you pay a fee that starts from 49 crowns per month based on your income. And you need to send an application for this benefit to Folksam, which is the insurance company. And if you're entitled to also to compensation from Trygghetsstiftelsen during unemployment for 44 days, you should first apply to them, and then you will have our income insurance after that if needed, and it means that you can get up to 194 days in that case. So here is to illustrate the value of the income insurance. If you have an average salary of 40,000 crowns today, you will get about 30,000 after tax. And if you become unemployed, you can get as most about 19,000 from the unemployment insurance. And the income insurance will give you almost 4,000 extra for the first 100 days. For after first 100 days, the ceiling is lowered in the unemployment insurance, but the total amount will still be the same. And that is because the part that comes from the income insurance will be higher instead. And if you have bought the additional insurance, that compensation will go on up to 300 days. It's important to know that the additional insurance must also be bought 1 year before the unemployment starts, so before the first day you are unemployed. So there is a qualification time there as well. So when you work abroad, if you're posted abroad by a state employer or work abroad for employer in Sweden, you can stay as a member in Akademikernas A-kassa. But if you work for another employer outside Sweden, you should usually join A-kassan in that country. In many countries, this comes automatically, but there are exceptions, so you have to check from case to case. And when you return to Sweden, make sure to join Akademikernas A-kassa immediately again if you had to leave the membership. As I pointed out now, work in other member states within EU can also be considered when you return to Sweden based on situation. You should stay as a member in A-kassan if you have a stipend in Sweden. And you should always contact Akademikernas A-kassa before you leave to find out how to handle your situation. And the income insurance included in the membership will work when you return if you get unemployment benefits from A-kassan based on previous income in Sweden or from another country, if that's possible. But it's important that you stay as a member in SULF, of course, to be covered by the income insurance. So then we come to a section about residence permit and how to be able to stay in Sweden, but also right of residence, that is for EU citizens and their relatives. So as a postdoc, you will normally get a residence permit for research in Sweden, even if you have an employment. It can be an employment or a stipend, still the same type of residence permit. I can say that the new rules that you might have heard of, that you need a minimum salary to get work permit, does not apply if you have a residence permit for research. And you can read more about residence permits at our webpage. In order to get permanent residence permit in Sweden, you have to be here for 4 years, within 7 years, and you can combine time with work permit, residence permit for research, or residence permit for as a doctoral candidate. And if you have got a permanent residency, you can also apply for citizenship if you have been here for 5 years. And you can also, after 5 years, apply for status as long-term resident, which will automatically give you permanent residency if that is approved. And the point with long-term residency is that the income requirement for permanent residence and long-term residency, they are different. And when it comes to long-term residency, you can also count other incomes than employment, for example, stipends, unemployment benefits, or income from a partner. I also want to stress that we expect new rules to come for permanent residency and citizenship, and also in long-term residency, when it comes to language tests and knowledge about the Swedish society. We do not exactly know how and when. And when it comes to the income requirement for permanent residency as such, rules are now clarified by the Court of Appeal, and I will mention that soon. But we also work hard to make changes to the legislation, as we can see many problems, not only with permanent residency, but also, for example, to change from one permit to another without having to leave Sweden first. And we have listed 10 problems that we would like to see solved. And it has been said that an inquiry will start on that, but we have not seen that happen yet. So, many of you might have heard about the judgment from the Court of Appeal. So I was thinking to mention about that as well here. So the background is that the Court of Appeal is the Supreme Court when it comes to migration issues, and their judgment sets a precedence that should be followed by Migrationsverket and the migration courts. And you can see the number of this judgment here, and it came in December last year. And the question they answered was what is required to meet the income requirement for permanent residency that was introduced in 2021. And this case is particularly interesting because it concerned a doctor's candidate at SLU, but it's of course general, the rules general, no matter who applies for permanent residency. And what they said, that they clarified what the term viss varaktighet, which is how long an income should last, and what that really means. And Migrationsverket had before claimed that you must have an income for 18 months, and that you can only consider an employment that you have at the time when they take their decision, and not any possible future employments. And the court said that the income should last not for 18 months, but that 1 year is enough. They also said that you have to consider the likelihood to get an income also after the contract you have at the time when they take the decision. And that therefore you have to make an individual assessment in each case. And they also mentioned that in order to live in Sweden with residence permit for, and that includes, of course, doctoral candidates, but also researchers, you must have an income, and therefore you have shown that an ability to have an income. So that's also one thing they looked at. So how will this change the situation for you? And that includes, of course, researchers and postdocs. You must still fulfill the other requirements. that I mentioned before, 4 years with residence permit within 7 years. Shown good conduct, you should have an intention to stay in Sweden. And as I mentioned later on, new requirements will be added. And we know that Migrationsverket has updated their internal guidelines for this procedure. And you can see the number of that guideline here. And as I mentioned before, there's a discussion how to look at time when you're posted abroad, especially by a state employer. In some cases, we have seen that this is counted as time in Sweden, but it is not very clear at the moment. So that's one thing we are discussing now with Migrationsverket. So if you're not able to get permanent residency, you can still stay in Sweden. In some cases, for example, if you have completed studies or research with a residence permit for research, you can apply for a residence permit for 1 year in order to seek a job here. Then you must be able to support yourself during that time, but if you are entitled to unemployment insurance, that will also count as an income here. And if you get a job during this year, you are free to start that job and apply later for another type of permit. There are still some problems to change from this type of permit to a permit for research or studies, which is one problem that we would like this upcoming inquiry to change. And then I can mention a few words about right of residence, which is for those of you that are citizens within EU or EA countries and also family members to such citizens. You do not need any work permit or residence permit, as you instead have right of residence. Here, I would like to stress that Swedish citizens are usually not seen as EU/EA citizens when it comes to rights for their relatives. It's only if the Swedish citizen has moved within EU and come to Sweden that can happen. So in that case, as a relative, you will still have to apply for residence permit. When you have had right of residence for 5 years, you can apply for permanent right of residence. And you can also apply for citizenship when you have right of residence and you have been here for 5 years. And if you're a Nordic citizen, you don't have to bother that much. You can freely move to other Nordic countries and you can actually get citizenship already after 2 years, if that would be of interest. When you work abroad, there are a few things to think about. Make sure if you need residence permit and work permit in that country. And of course, if you are a citizen in a country within EU/EA, it should be no problem as you have right of residence and you don't need a work permit. But if you work outside those countries, you will probably need a work permit. As a non-EU/EA citizen, you will also need residence permit and work permit in other member states. However, if you have been given long-term residency in Sweden as a citizen from outside EU, you can easily work in most other EU countries and get residence permit there. So that's another advantage with long-term residency that does not come with. If you have permanent residence in Sweden, you can stay abroad for up to 2 years if you inform Migrationsverket before you leave. And long-term residency can be upheld also for a longer time, as long as you stay within EU. So that was everything. And I want to mention finally that you are most welcome to apply for a membership if you're not yet a member, and the membership fee is 270 crowns per month, and that includes income insurance. And doctor candidates with employment, you pay 125, and that also includes the income insurance. And if you have a stipend, you pay even less. We also offer double membership with most other unions within SACO. and basically it means that you can have 2 memberships for the price of 1. And you can see one example here. And right now we have a campaign. So as a doctor candidate, you can get a free membership for 3 months if you apply during January to March this year. And you can read more at our webpage. And again, remember that the membership in SULF does not include unemployment insurance fund, so you have to apply for that separately and pay a separate fee to them. Yeah, that was all. And now there might be some questions.
Yes, there might be some questions. We have quite a large number of questions, not that much time, but I'll just start from the beginning. I'm about to finish my 3 years fixed term postdoc. I want to know when and I can apply for a permit extension to be job seeker. How many months in advance?
I think you should ask Migrationsverket, but I think you can do it sometime in advance. You have to just show that the time as with the permit for research, which I expect that you have now, that will be completed, and that then you will get this permit from 1 year after, from the day after that.
Thank you. Could a postdoc work an additional 20% at another university, for example, for teaching purposes?
Yeah, that should be possible. But as I mentioned, try to figure out if it jeopardizes the tax-free status of the stipend, if you have that. And if you have an employment for one university and want to be employed at another one, you have to also sort that out with both employers to see if it's possible, because otherwise these employments might be to compete with each other.
Thank you. The next one, do these rules apply to Chalmers as well? And I'm not quite sure what.
Depends on what rules, but the postdoc agreement applies there, and many other agreements. But since Chalmers is not a state institution, there are some differences when it comes to social insurance, for example.
Thank you. Where does the money come from when getting funding for additional cost for living and travel from URA?
It has to be paid by the university from whatever grant you have, or if they add extra money for that. And we know that that could be sometimes problematic to convince them to pay more than the salary, and but it's quite possible, and that's something you should discuss with them in your individual contract.
Thank you. When posted abroad, how should tax payments in both countries be handled?
Yeah, that's also something you need to sort out. Usually there are tax agreements between countries. They are more bilateral, so they are not part of the EU cooperation that way. So you have to find out, but I would assume that they include the fact that if you are posted by a state employer, you do not pay tax in the country where you stay, but you still pay tax in Sweden.
Thank you. Let's see if I get the next one right. What is the normal notification time if any postdoc want to leave the postdoc due to getting permanent job in Sweden or other EU country?
Normally the notification time is 2 years when you have worked for at least a year in Sweden.
Okay. Can people who receive a PhD in Sweden get scholarship postdoc? Stipend, I guess.
In some cases, but again, that depends on tax rules. So in some cases, it might be problematic if you have lived here for a long time and so on. So that should be sorted out in each situation.
Do stipend postdocs get access to the public health system? If so, how?
Yeah, if you live in Sweden, and the easiest way to figure out is actually if you have a full personal number, then you are registered here and you are entitled to get this healthcare without paying more than the general fees.
All right. I think I'll skip the next one. Can we get the presentation of the same? I think we won't send out the presentation, but we will send out a link to the recording of the presentation, so you can access it that way. Is research engineer contract considered as a postdoc?
Not as a definition, but of course it can include the same type of job, but or tasks. But the postdoc title, so to say, is sort of used when you have the collective agreement, but also in some other cases, perhaps. So, and of course, if you are a research engineer, there will be a question, will you get residence permit for work or for research? And you must sort that out with Migrationsverket.
Can you have a postdoc grant, for example, from VR and a stipend at the same time?
Yeah, again, that depends on the tax rules, but I would assume that it's hard to combine as the postdoc employment that you get through this kind of time grant is supposed to be full-time.
Thank you. Is it possible to receive social benefits from the host university in the USA, for example, when having a tax-free stipend such as Wennergren?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I guess it's up to US and the university there, so you should discuss with them how that will work. But of course, US is one example where it's very important to find out that you are covered by health insurance, as it might otherwise be extremely expensive if you end up in hospital there, for example.
During a job seeker visa, are there any internship or study programs at a university or industry one can join?
Yeah, I don't know exactly, but as you are free to take any job during this time, so that should be, of course, possible if you find something.
Good. Does the postdoc contract include travel expenses and or relocation expenses?
That's something that you have to agree with the university in your individual contract.
Can a postdoc fellow switch full-time contract to can
remote,
you see the question?
I think, yeah.
True. Okay. Or 50% during the contract period if postdoc fellow get job in another EU country. I'm not quite sure if I get that.
Yeah, if you want to work remotely, you have to agree
remotely,
on that with your university. And as I mentioned, there are some issues we need to sort out, how the collective agreement covers that when you are, if you're not posted abroad specifically. And as I also said, postdoc employment is supposed to be 100% when you are using the postdoc collective agreement. But there might be an exception if you have two half-time employments for the same purpose. That could be an exception. So might be possible. I have no examples of this, so that would be something new.
Thank you. Will I receive retirement benefits from Sweden when I retire if I move from Sweden to another EU country?
Yes, the benefits that you have received for pension when you work here, they will remain, so you can apply for them when you reach certain age, and doesn't matter if you live inside or outside EU.
The next one is sort of connected to the earlier one. What are the rules for remote work abroad for postdocs?
Yeah, again, that's some issues we have to sort out, but you have to agree with the employer, as you always have, to work remotely. So that's the answer, I guess, for that.
How to use the insurances under employment, for example, compensation under unemployment, compensation for unemployment. Does one need to contact the insurance company?
Well, it depends. Unemployment benefits you can apply for once you have got unemployed and registered at Arbetsförmedlingen. Some insurances that you get under the employment, for example, if you are sick or parental leave, some will come automatically, hopefully, for example, sickness, but others you might have to apply for or rather send some notification that you have received parental leave compensation from Försäkringskassan. Depends. There are some local collective agreements with exceptions in some cases, so you have to figure out. But the additional insurances that we provide, then you have to send an application to Folksam to get that compensation.
If I receive funding for 3 to 5 extra years after my 2-year postdoc ends, how will this extra employment be registered?
In that case, it should basically either be a permanent position, I guess, if it's for the same university, or as an assistant lecturer, biträdande lektor. That's another possibility, but that, of course, requires a certain process to start such an employment at the university. But basically, it's not, apart from the postdoc agreement and employment as doctor candidate and so on, it's not possible to have a fixed term contract for more than 1 year now, except for assistant lecturer.
Thank you. It is supposed that VR International Postdoc Grant should cover all costs for all family members, including infants in a city expensive as Boston or New York. If not, which grant can one apply to receive funding for living expenses?
I don't exactly know the answer for that, so it's better to turn to VR or whatever agency you are applied to. But we hope that they will include some additional grant if you have a family and so on. But you can, of course, hopefully the university can also add some money in order to support this, as you have got this grant and you will work for them and produce research and other things that they will benefit from.
Thank you. When my postdoc contract ends, I will have been in Sweden for 4 years. Can I apply for a residence permit extension to be a job seeker? And also, I have Akademikernas a-kassa, unemployment insurance. Can I draw on those benefits after 4 years?
If your employment runs out and you are registered with Arbetsförmedlingen and fulfill the other requirements, then you can get this benefit. You should be able to get the benefits for unemployment. So that's basically, and if you apply for the residence permit as a job seeker and do it before the permit runs out, you have the right to work also freely while you're waiting for the decision. So, and therefore you should also be able to get unemployment benefit.
All right. Unfortunately, time is running out and it's just 1 minute left. I think we just have to conclude the question time and just say thank you to you all for attending. And we will send out an email to you later when the recording is uploaded to the website, and we will also enclose some links to useful sites and so on. Do you want to add anything, Robert?
And the remaining questions, if there is something there, we can also perhaps add some information in that mail to answer those questions as well, I think.
Good.
Hopefully. Yeah.
All right. So thank you all for attending, and we will send you an email later today or tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.